Happy Thursday, loves. Good evening. And if this is your first time checking out any of my live videos, thank you for checking it out. My name is Dani LeBerry. I'm a licensed psychotherapist and a happiness transformation coach. And I typically work with people who are feeling unhappy, unfulfilled, overwhelmed. Hey AJ, thanks for joining me tonight. And June is men's health. So I'm going to be doing 3 different Facebook Lives this month, tonight being the first one. And the theme for this month is men's health. So tonight is, how does toxic masculinity affect mental health? So if we think about from a young age, our society has a tendency to tell our young males things like boys don't cry, suck it up. And saying those sorts of things, especially constantly, can lead someone to really suppress emotions. So, rigid, oh, by the way, I got this information just so you're aware from the APA, which is the American Psychological Association. Last year, they came out with some guidelines. The guidelines are called Psychological Practice with Boys and Men. Because statistics are showing how many more men are starting to really show signs of aggression, rigid suppression of emotions leads to increased negative risk taking and inappropriate aggression. Factors that can put some males at greater risk for psychological and physical health problems. So if you're kind of like, well, what does that mean, Dani? I like to give my clients the example of a soda can. Have you ever taken a soda can and shake it up and shake it up and shake it up and shake it up? So every time a male person, or anyone really in general, anytime someone experiences something where there's frustration or there's stress or there's any sort of unpleasant emotion, if it's not talked about and it's just suppressed, it can really come out in other ways. It's going to come out some way or another. Most of the time it comes out through crying for some people or feeling really agitated. Now, if you think about that soda can, right, and we're shaking it up every single time something happens, what happens when we eventually open that soda can? It explodes. So that's where violence comes through, or actually, that's what's going into my next bullet point here. Rigid masculine norms. Michael says, as a psychotherapist running a men's therapy group for 7 people, I agree with the content on this video. Thank you so much. I appreciate you joining, by the way, Michael. Thank you. So some of the rigid masculine norms, how does that show up, right? If we're kind of like, well, Dani, what does that mean for me? What does that look like? Things like problems with dating, or if you look at interpersonal intimacy. I like to give people, I like to share, I've heard on a podcast before, if you're involved or someone you know is involved in an unhealthy relationship, if you see that you're triggered by something, angered by something, set off by something, use that as a mirror to see what wounds still need healing. So that's just to piggyback on the interpersonal intimacy. Greater depression and anxiety, abuse of substances, for example, abusing alcohol or prescription pills or recreational drugs. Problems with interpersonal violence, for example, sexual assault or spousal abuse or spousal violence. Health risks, if you think about high blood pressure, constantly under stress, if that's not getting talked about or released in a healthy way, that's eventually going to lead to physical problems as well. And the last one, overall psychological distress. Okay, so now we talked about all these signs and symptoms and things. What do we do with them? How do we, I'm very solution focused and outcomes oriented. So some tips I can give you. This is going to sound a little silly or simple, but even just going on Google and typing in emotion pinwheel, and you'll find all different kinds. They're going to look like rainbows and circles. And if you look that up, start by just reading it and understanding trying to identify what emotion we're feeling. Now, I know that sounds maybe a little bit silly, right? And just so simple, kind of like, why would I do that, Dani? Like, obviously I'm feeling mad or I am feeling angry. But our emotions can be a little bit more complicated than that. It's not really what we see on the surface. Sometimes it's underlying things. So even when I work with couples sometimes, one person usually wants to talk about the conflict right now, right then and there. And the other person usually wants to talk about the conflict later on. Just noticing things like that. There's so many little tiny things that we don't realize how our emotions can come from. So start by doing that, noticing and identifying what exactly and how you're feeling and where some of that's stirring up from. My second suggestion is, if you're a male and you're watching this, you may not be happy when I tell you this, is to reach out for help. And I know that that's a big thing with men. People, sometimes we don't like to ask for help. We find that it's a sign of weakness. But if we can break the stigma and understand that it's actually a huge sign of courage to reach out for help, to say, you know what, I have some challenges here and I need to work on them. That takes a lot more courage. It's actually more courageous to do that as opposed to holding on to it festering, and then it coming out in your life in a way that you could not have imagined and maybe even regret. So I hope this helps. If it did, please feel free to share it with someone or loved ones. Again, my name is Dani LeBerry. I'm a licensed psychotherapist and a happiness transformation coach. If this video was helpful and you found that maybe you have some questions for me or some more information that you'd like to know about, feel free to contact me. My email is Dani, that's D-A-N-I, @DaniLeBerry.com. Have a great night and thank you so much for watching. Take care.